I am Ruzzel Morales, a youth leader from the Philippines. So I was asked by Surge India International to talk about discussing the undiscussed, and I chose to talk about the intersection of mental health, structural inequality, and climate crisis. You might be wondering why I chose these topics. One, because this is personal, and I think that the personal is political. And two, I think that all of the three topics that I chose today are interconnected and have a major convergence. All of this talks about the alienation and the feeling of vulnerability. But before we proceed, let's define what is mental health. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, how we feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. So, what is currently happening? The Philippines has the highest number of depressed people in Southeast Asia. Approximately 1 in 5 Filipino adults suffers from a mental disorder. The National Statistics Office reported that mental illness is the third most common form of disability in the country. Records show a high number of cases among the youth. But this is not only limited to the Philippines. Around the world, health professionals are reporting a spike in mental problems since people were forced into lockdowns at home and contain the pandemic. At home to contain the pandemic, and millions lost their livelihoods. How is this related to structural inequality and climate crisis? Since the Philippines is number 1 in the Global Risk Index with 5 of the 10 deadliest typhoons to hit the Philippines since 2006, thousands of citizens are affected every time. Climate change and related disasters cause anxiety-related responses as well as chronic and severe mental health disorders. Losing loved ones and sources of livelihood can have mental and emotional effects on survivors, such as myself. I'm a survivor of a typhoon that struck Philippines in 2009, and it gives me trauma every time a typhoon comes back again. And of course, it affects my mental well-being. These types of tragedies are common all over the world and are particularly common in the Philippines due to the high levels of poverty. This is where we can see how mental health, structural inequality, or poverty and climate crisis is interconnected. Mental illness is hard in itself, living in poverty is hard in itself, and climate crisis is hard in itself. And I'm so unfortunate, and our generation is unfortunate, that 3 of these issues are currently present in different societies all over the world. And I also, as I've said, the personal is political, and I experience it firsthand. All of the 3. And it's devastating to have these 3 of them combined because they aggravate our loss and we are left grieving for something beyond our control. But the sadder truth is that with these interrelated issues of mental health, structural inequality, and climate crisis, Philippine society has traditionally paid little attention to mental wellness. Even as suicide continue to rise, especially among the youth. In general, people with mental illness are discriminated against, and mental health illnesses is not socially acceptable. With all this, it is a sad reality that in the Philippines, we romanticize resilience or as the solution to mental health, poverty, and climate crisis. We are used to losing that instead of proactively solving the root problem, we are reactive and we brush it off. As someone who is experiencing mental health problems, I have experienced being told many times, most times by older generation, that my mental illness should be brushed aside I should just get over it, and that I am making things up. Like everything will magically get better. It's not a talk of grit as much as it's a talk of structural inequality and our access to resources that will make us feel better and to cope better with all the stressors that we have to face. But we can do something to break the stigma and spread the word about mental illnesses and how it is interrelated to structural inequality or poverty and the climate crisis. As I said earlier, these three topics are all interconnected. They all boil down to alienation, the feeling of detachment. Mental illnesses makes you feel alienated and detached from your own body, making you feel helpless to control your thoughts. It feels helpless to be born in poverty and being forced to survive rather than thrive for your passion. Climate crisis, on the other hand, makes us realize how our economy alienated us from our environment. So it is taking a toll on us. And alienation is that feeling of loneliness, that even though you're not alone, you feel lonely, you feel like it's you against the world. But that's not the case. Although alienation makes us vulnerable, we can do something. We can resist. In a world that tells us not to care, we can resist by caring. In a world that forces us to be hyper-individualistic, let's resist by reconnecting not only to ourselves but also to our communities as well as to our environment. One way that we can fight back is to spread the word that about mental health and break the stigma so that we can create a kinder, sensitive, and more humane society. Not only for those who are like me, suffering from mental health and all the intersectionalities with structural inequality as well as the climate crisis and all other factors that exacerbates or aggravates our feeling of helplessness and loneliness should be something that we can freely talk about. Let's break the stigma so that we can create a caring, loving, and more humane future for all of us. Again, this is Ruzzel Morales, and thank you.